It started on what should have been a peaceful Saturday afternoon. My wife had just come home from a long week of work and decided to relax in our own backyard, a quiet corner she'd carefully set up with flowers, a hammock, and a little table for her tea. But just as she settled in, the screech of sneakers and loud voices broke the calm. That's when he showed up, Karen's teenage son, barging through the side gate like he owned the place. Now, we've had our issues with Karen, the neighbor from across the fence, but her son. He brought a whole new level of entitlement. With a group of rowdy friends standing behind him, he pointed at my wife in her own backyard and told her she needed to move. According to him, they were throwing a party, and they needed the true say. And they needed the space. Never mind that the yards aren't connected. Never mind that it wasn't his property. And never mind the fact that my wife had done absolutely nothing but sit down with a book. He didn't just ask, he demanded. And when my wife calmly told him no, his attitude turned nasty fast. The way he spoke to her, the tone, the words he chose. It wasn't just disrespectful. It had an ugly underlying vibe that made it crystal clear. This wasn't just about a party. There was something deeper and uglier at play, something that made the air feel heavier than it should have been. I didn't know about any of this until she called me from the backyard, her voice shaking. And when I walked out and saw him still standing there, arms crossed like some self-declared king of the block, I knew this was going to be a confrontation, and not the kind you walk away from easily. As I stepped into the yard, the tension hit me like a wall. My wife stood frozen near the hammock, holding her phone tightly. Karen's son, let's just call him Tyler, glared at me, like I was the one trespassing. His group of friends stood behind him, laughing and whispering, clearly thinking this was some kind of joke. But what really struck me was the way he talked to her, like she didn't belong there. Not once did he ask politely. He just barked orders, like our home was some community park he had reserved. Now here's where things get more twisted. Karen and I have never exactly been close. From the day we moved in, she made it clear we weren't her kind of neighbors. She'd give us fake smiles at HOA meetings, but I caught her whispering things to other board members more than once. My wife always tried to be friendly, even baked cookies during the holidays. Karen never once accepted them. And over time, the little signs added up, trash blown over onto our side. Late-night complaints to the HOA about music that wasn't even playing, and sideways comments that made you wonder what she really meant. So when Tyler showed up demanding access to our backyard for the party, it felt like more than just a teenager being bold. It felt planned, like he assumed we'd be too scared to push back. And what really stung? The look on my wife's face, not just shocked, but hurt. Like she had finally seen through all those little neighborly lies. I told Tyler he needed to leave. That's when Karen herself came storming out from her back door, shouting like we were the problem. My gut sank. I could tell this wasn't just about a party. This was about control, and things were about to get ugly. Karen stomped across the lawn like she owned it, her finger already wagging in the air. You people are always looking for problems, she snapped, not even trying to hide the bitterness in her voice. My wife stepped closer to me, still holding her tea like a shield, while I kept my voice level. Your son just told my wife to leave her own backyard so he could throw a party, I said firmly, but Karen wasn't listening. She was already on a rant about how her son deserved to celebrate with his friends, and how we were creating tension in a peaceful neighborhood. That word peaceful sounded almost laughable coming from her. For the last year, it's been anything but. Behind the picket fences and manicured lawns, there's been a slow war brewing. Karen's influence in the HOA had started to shift things. Small changes at first, new rules about yard decor, noise limits, guest parking, but they always seemed to target the same few families. Families that didn't look like hers. Families like ours. People started whispering about her, playing favorites, but no one wanted to confront her directly. She was the kind of neighbor who smiled while filing complaints. Meanwhile, Tyler's group started spreading out like they were gearing up for the party anyway. A few even pulled out lawn chairs and Bluetooth speakers, casually ignoring the tension. That's when our other neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, peeked over the fence. He's been here longer than any of us. Retired Army, quiet but sharp. He didn't say a word, just watched. And somehow, that felt like a shift. My wife whispered, "They think we won't stand up." And she was right. This wasn't just about a backyard. It was about being pushed out of our own space, slowly, deliberately. I could feel the line being drawn, and we were being dared to cross it. The tension was so thick, you could feel it in the air. Tyler's music started thumping through the speakers, and more teens began filtering through the side gate like they had every right to be there. My wife and I stood our ground, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. This wasn't just a neighborhood argument anymore. This was a full-on standoff. Karen was pacing now, phone in hand, threatening to call the HOA president, claiming we were creating a disturbance by not cooperating with her son's gathering. I glanced back toward our kitchen window, wondering if I should start recording. But just as I was about to pull my phone out, Mr. Jenkins stepped into our yard. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood between us and Karen, looking her straight in the eyes. "This isn't your yard, Karen," he finally said, calm but sharp. That's when a few more neighbors started to poke their heads out too. First, the couple from across the street. Then, the lady from the corner lot. They didn't say anything yet, but their presence added pressure. Karen noticed too, her confident tone started to falter, but Tyler didn't back down. He cranked the volume louder and yelled, "This is going to happen whether you like it or not." A couple of his friends laughed, pulling out drinks and setting up a speaker on our patio table. My blood was boiling, but I knew reacting too fast would only make it worse. That's what Karen wanted, for us to lose our cool so she could twist it into another complaint. Then, almost on cue, one of the teenagers knocked over a flower pot my wife had just replanted that morning. Dirt spilled across the patio tiles. She stared at it silently, but I could see the fire building inside her. Everyone was watching now. The quiet neighbors, the loud teens, Karen, us. The line had officially been crossed. And in that moment, something snapped, not in anger, but in resolve. What happened next changed everything. Just as my wife bent down to pick up the broken flower pot, a new voice rang out from the side of the house, one we hadn't heard in a while. "What in the world is going on back here?" It was Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly widow who lived next door. She rarely came outside anymore, especially since her hip surgery. But today, she stood on her porch with a phone in her hand, eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "I already called the police," she said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "This isn't your party zone, Tyler. You've crossed the line." Karen's face shifted instantly from smug to pale. Tyler froze, and so did his friends. They weren't expecting someone else to step in, especially not Mrs. Alvarez. For a second, it looked like things might finally settle down. But then Karen spun around and snapped, "You have no idea what you're talking about. Marta, these people are the ones stirring up trouble. They've been doing it since day one." That was it. The second plot twist came not from us, but from the neighborhood itself. One by one, the other neighbors stepped off their porches and into the street. Ow. The couple from across the road nodded at us and quietly walked over to our fence. Mr. Jenkins folded his arms. "Actually, Karen," he said, "we've been noticing things for a while now. It's not them, it's you." Karen looked stunned. Tyler, meanwhile, pulled out his phone and started filming, probably thinking it would help his case. But what none of them expected was the HOA vice president showing up right then, holding a clipboard and looking exhausted. "I got 4 complaints this morning," he said. 3 were about noise, and 1 was about harassment. Then he looked straight at Karen, and none of them were filed by this family. My wife stood up slowly, dirt still on her hands. The crowd was bigger now. Eyes were watching from porches, from driveways, from windows. And in that heavy silence, the power shifted. But it wasn't over yet, not even close. The HOA vice president took a step closer, his voice calm but serious. "Karen, this isn't the first time we've had issues. There have been repeated concerns about your behavior towards certain residents. I didn't want to believe it, but today, ... Well, it's all out in the open now." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Tyler, still recording with his phone, looked around and realized he didn't have the crowd on his side anymore. His friends started slipping away, quietly packing up their things, unsure what they had just walked into. Then came the real turning point. One of the teens, someone none of us recognized, walked up to Tyler and said, "Man, your mom told us this was your house." The yard went silent. Karen's eyes widened, and Tyler looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "She said the neighbors were renting from you, that you were letting them stay here because they needed help," the kid added. "You said they'd probably leave once we started setting up." That was the twist none of us saw coming. Karen had lied to her son's friends, painted us as squatters or freeloaders, just to justify crashing our property. She had told an entire made-up story to make her son feel entitled to a yard that wasn't his, and worse. To humiliate us, the vice president let out a slow breath. "This is serious, Karen. This goes beyond HOA complaints now." He pulled out his phone. "I'm documenting everything. Legal action may follow." Karen stood there frozen, her carefully curated reputation unraveling right there on the lawn. Tyler turned off his phone and mumbled something before walking off, red-faced and quiet. The crowd started to thin, and my wife stood beside me, calm but tired. The pot was still broken. The yard was still messy. But we weren't the ones who looked out of place anymore. And just as we thought it was over, the vice president turned to us and said, "By the way, you're not the only neighbors she's lied about. There's something you should probably know." The vice president stayed behind after most of the neighbors had gone back to their homes. He explained that Karen had filed a series of misleading reports about several residents' complaints that didn't match up with security footage or witness accounts. Apparently, we weren't the only ones she had targeted. It had just taken today's chaos for people to speak up and connect the dots. He apologized to us on behalf of the board and assured us that Karen's actions would be formally reviewed. Whether that meant fines, suspension from the HOA, or worse. He didn't say, but the tone in his voice made it clear things wouldn't be brushed under the rug. We spent the rest of the evening quietly cleaning up the backyard. My wife, though tired, looked relieved. Not because the confrontation was over, but because, for once, we weren't alone in it. Neighbors we barely spoke to before had stepped in. Mrs. Alvarez even sent over a small flower arrangement the next day to replace the one that was broken, and Mr. Jenkins. He knocked on our door later that week with old photos of the neighborhood, smiling as he said, "Thought you might want to see what this place looked like before the drama." In the days that followed, the energy around the block changed. People started waving more, speaking up more, like a tension had finally lifted. Karen kept to herself. Tyler, too. The party never happened. But more importantly, the message was clear. This was our home. Not just the building, not just the yard. All of it. And no amount of entitlement or lies could take that away. Sometimes it takes a loud moment to reveal quiet truths. And now, Every time we sit outside, there's peace again because the line was drawn and we didn't back down.